On my 68th birthday, as the candles flickered against the ocean breeze and laughter drifted across the poolside, I heard a whisper that turned my blood cold. My daughter-in-law leaned close to my only son, her diamond bracelet flashing under the lanterns, and said softly, "Tomorrow the policy matures. Tonight might be the night." That single sentence cut through the music sharper than the knife that had just sliced my birthday cake. I sat frozen in my teak chair, champagne glass halfway to my lips, realizing she wasn't talking about gifts or celebrations. She was talking about me. My name is Harold Mercer. I'm 68 years old, a retired architect and a widower. For 4 decades, I built luxury estates across Florida, beachfront homes, glass towers, and resorts worth millions. The villa we sat in that evening, perched above Palm Beach waters, was my masterpiece. Valued at over $4 million, it represented everything I had worked for. Every column, every marble floor, every line in the blueprint was mine. When my wife Margaret passed away 6 years ago, I renewed a life insurance policy, $2 million, to make sure Lucas, my only son, would never struggle. I thought it was love that bound us. But that night, as I watched Lucas smile nervously and Brianna raise her crystal glass with rehearsed grace, I realized love had been replaced by calculation. People expect betrayal to roar in like a hurricane, but sometimes it slips in disguised as a toast, hidden in the glitter of champagne bubbles. Let me ask you this. If on your own birthday you overheard your child's spouse plotting your death, what would your next move be? Comment below and tell me where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story travels. Because on the night of my 68th birthday, under the golden lights of my poolside villa, I understood that I wasn't just celebrating another year of life. I was fighting for the years I had left. I excused myself from the poolside celebration earlier than usual that night. Guests lingered, sipping wine and laughing under the soft glow of lanterns, but I needed distance. I needed silence. I carried my glass of champagne upstairs into the master suite that overlooked the Atlantic. Down below, Brianna's laughter rose above the music, high-rehearsed, sharp. Lucas's voice trailed after her, lower, uncertain. I closed the sliding door and leaned against it, staring out at the black stretch of ocean. The waves moved endlessly, steady and sure, a rhythm no human scheme could interrupt. My heart, however, was beating in jagged staccato. What had she said? Tomorrow the policy matures. Tonight might be the night. It replayed in my head like a broken record, each time cutting deeper. You see, I wasn't some frail old man without memory. I was 68, yes, but I had built skyscrapers and waterfront palaces. My mind was still sharp, trained to see flaws in designs, to notice when a line was even a fraction off. That same instinct had now caught the flaw in my family, the crack in the foundation of love. I walked slowly across the room to the oak dresser. On top sat a wooden box, scuffed at the corners, its hinges worn from years of being opened. It was Margaret's box. My late wife had kept her keepsakes inside: wedding photos, her mother's pearls, a copy of the Bible she had given me on our wedding day. I hadn't touched it in months, maybe longer. But tonight my hand reached for it, almost without thought. Inside, the Bible's leather cover was still smooth, though the gold lettering had faded. Margaret's handwriting on the first page made my throat tighten to Harold. May faith be the blueprint you build your life on. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the party noise muffled behind the glass doors, and ran my fingers over those words. My wife had known me better than anyone. She knew I built houses and towers, but I rarely stopped to build the unseen structures inside trust, patience, humility. Faith, she had called it. I hadn't been to church in years. After Margaret died, I found it easier to bury myself in work than to sit in pews that only reminded me of her absence. But staring at those words now, I felt something stir. Maybe, just maybe, God had let me overhear that whisper tonight, not as a curse, but as a warning. A gift of foresight. I whispered into the empty room. Maybe you wanted me to know before it was too late. I could still see Lucas as a boy in my mind. 8 years old, barefoot on the beach, carrying his little blue bucket of seashells. His hair bleached by the sun, his face lit by laughter. That boy had trusted me with his whole world. When Margaret passed, I did everything to keep him afloat. Paid for his college in Miami, helped him buy his first condo, even bailed him out when his investments went sideways. And now that boy had grown into a man, standing beside a woman whose smile hid knives. I refused to believe Lucas was entirely lost. I wanted to think he was trapped, pressured, maybe desperate, but the facts were inescapable. He hadn't pushed away from her. He hadn't argued when she said tonight might be the night. He had just nodded. I poured the rest of the champagne into the sink and let the bubbles die in silence. I would not sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my desk, opened my leather-bound notebook, and began to write. First, the assets, the Palm Beach villa current market value around $4.2 million. A small condo in Sarasota purchased years ago as a rental property valued at about $600,000. The $2 million life insurance policy. Retirement accounts worth another $750,000. I had thought all this would secure Lucas's future. But now I saw it differently. To Brianna, it was a treasure chest waiting to be plundered. To Lucas, it was an escape from debts I didn't yet fully understand. Every figure I wrote down was a reminder my life was more valuable dead than alive in their eyes. I glanced back at the Bible still lying open on the bed. My wife's words stared at me. Faith is the blueprint. Maybe God wasn't done with me yet. Maybe all those years of drafting, designing, and double-checking blueprints were about to be tested in a different way. I had survived recessions, hurricanes, lawsuits, even a near-fatal car accident in my 40s. Perhaps this was simply the latest storm, and like every storm, it could be weathered with preparation. I looked out the window again. From up here, the pool glittered like liquid silver under the moonlight. It was supposed to be a place of joy. The grandkids had splashed in it every summer. Margaret used to sit by the edge with her straw hat dipping her toes into the cool water. Now it was a weapon, a staged accident waiting to happen. But they had underestimated one thing: me. I still had the skills of an architect, the eye for detail, the discipline of planning, the stubborn refusal to accept failure. If they were designing a plan to kill me, I would draft a better plan to stop them. And so, sitting alone in my bedroom Bible on the bed and notebook open before me, I began to map out the coming days, where cameras were placed, which neighbors might be allies, which lawyer I could trust, which detective in Palm Beach had dealt with elder fraud cases before. The party below went on for hours, but up here in the quiet, I was laying the first bricks of my counterattack. I whispered into the night, not sure if I was speaking to Margaret, to God, or just to myself. You warned me for a reason. I will not die in that pool. And with that vow, Harold Mercer, architect of buildings, began to architect his own survival. The morning after my birthday, Palm Beach woke with its usual perfection, sunlight glinting off ocean waves, gulls circling overhead, the smell of salt and hibiscus carried by the breeze. But inside my chest, the air was heavy. I brewed my coffee, strong, poured it into the old porcelain mug Margaret once favored, and sat in the study that overlooked the pool. The place looked untouched, as if last night's party had been just a dream. Caterers had cleared the plates and folded away the linens. Only the water remained smooth as glass, waiting. I turned my attention to the wall of monitors above my desk. Long before Lucas married Brianna, I had designed a personal surveillance system around the villa. Architects see security as part of the blueprint, and I wasn't about to let $4 million of property or my peace of mind go unprotected. High-end cameras, underwater lenses for the pool, and even an audio pickup hidden in the garden speakers. It had all been idle for months. But after what I'd overheard, I felt compelled to review every angle. I clicked through the footage from midnight. At first, just laughter, clinking glasses, neighbors singing happy birthday. But then, at 12:42 a.m., the lens caught them, Lucas and Brianna returning to the poolside after the crowd had gone. They didn't see the camera tucked inside the stone column. Brianna leaned against the railing, her silk dress catching the moonlight, and said clear as day, "The pool lights are still faulty. If he slips after a few drinks, it'll look like a tragic accident. An old man insisting on swimming at night." No suspicion. My son's face. God, I'll never forget it, pinched with unease. "He's my father, Brianna." "I don't know if I can." "You can, Lucas." Her tone snapped like a whip. "The insurance pays $2 million. The villa sells for $4 million. Add in his accounts, that's nearly $7 million. Enough to pay your debts and still buy the yacht you keep dreaming about." Yacht. The word stung. I had promised Lucas I'd help him with a starter home, not bankroll fantasies of champagne cruises and gambling tables. Now that very greed was turning him into my executioner. On the recording, Lucas rubbed his face. The current around the lights. "It's dangerous." Exactly. Brianna's smile was cold, clinical. "You'll guide him out here after dinner. He'll be woozy from the wine. One little push and the rest is physics. When police arrive, we'll be grieving children shocked by a tragic fall. Case closed." I slammed my fist against the desk so hard the mug rattled. My own son. The boy who once built sandcastles beside me on this very beach, now conspiring to drown me in the same pool I had built for family joy. I replayed the clip 3 times, each word etching deeper into my memory. $2 million in life insurance. $4 million villa. A man's entire life reduced to a spreadsheet of assets. The cameras showed them leaving hand in hand, their silhouettes sharp against the moonlit tiles. To anyone else, they looked like a glamorous couple strolling after a party. To me, they were predators rehearsing my death. I sat back in my chair, exhaling slowly. The truth was out in the open now, captured in high definition, backed up to multiple drives. Proof that my instincts weren't paranoia. Proof that my life was in the balance. For a moment, I closed my eyes and asked myself the question that matters most. Was Lucas beyond saving, or had Brianna poisoned him beyond return? Either way, the blueprint of their plan was clear. And as any architect knows, once you see the flaws in a design, you can begin to rebuild it stronger, safer, unbreakable. I opened my notebook again, drew a line across the page, and wrote 2 words in bold letters: counterplan. The pool would not be my grave. It would be my evidence. I sat there in my study, the notebook open before me, the pool shimmering like an accomplice just beyond the glass doors. My pen hovered above the page, as if waiting for me to make the most important decision of my life. Do I walk downstairs, look Lucas straight in the eyes, and confront him? Do I demand an explanation, force him to admit what I had just seen with my own eyes and heard with my own ears? Or do I keep silent, play the role of the clueless old man, and let their plan unfold just far enough for me to catch them in the trap of their own making? I rubbed my temples. In the old days when I was drawing blueprints for skyscrapers, every decision had to balance risk and reward. If I miscalculated a load-bearing wall, the entire structure could collapse. This choice felt the same one wrong move, and the whole plan to survive could come crashing down. My heart ached as I replayed the footage of my son. The hesitation in his voice was real. There was still some humanity left in him. But Brianna, no, she wasn't hesitating. She was the one holding the blueprint for my death. And she had already calculated the payoff down to the last dollar. I reached again for Margaret's Bible. My fingers brushed the words on the inside cover, her handwriting, as steady as the day she wrote it. Faith is the blueprint. Maybe faith meant patience. Maybe faith meant trusting that the truth, when revealed at the right moment, would be stronger than confrontation in the heat of emotion. I whispered into the quiet room. Maybe, Lord, you want me to wait. To gather every nail, every beam, every piece of proof until the whole rotten structure collapses on them instead of me. I thought about my assets again. The $4 million villa, the $2 million life insurance policy, the retirement accounts. They weren't just numbers. They were my legacy, the sweat and labor of a lifetime. To Brianna, they were shiny baubles. To me, they were the security of my grandchildren, the memory of my wife, the roof over my head. And I would not hand them over to vultures. So I made my choice. I would not confront them. Not yet. I would gather proof. I would strengthen the walls of my life until no lie, no manipulation, no staged accident could break them down. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a name I hadn't dialed in years, Nora Whitman. She had been a sharp young lawyer in Miami back when I was finishing my last hotel project. Now she was one of the most respected elder law attorneys in Florida. If anyone could help me build a fortress around my estate, it was her. Before pressing call, I leaned back in my chair and asked myself one final question, the same question I'll ask you now. If you discovered your own child and their spouse plotting your death, would you storm into the kitchen and confront them face to face? Or would you play along, pretend to be blind, and quietly collect every shred of proof until the law came down like a hammer? Tell me in the comments, what would you do, type 1, if you'd let the law handle it quietly? Because in that moment, I chose silence. Silence, patience, and preparation. The deadliest weapons I had ever owned. I tapped the screen and listened to the line ring. Tomorrow, the counter plan would begin. Nora Whitman hadn't changed much since I'd last seen her. The sharpness in her eyes was the same, though now tempered by 2 decades of courtroom victories. Her Miami office smelled of leather and polish with tall windows looking out over Biscayne Bay. I sat across from her desk, my notebook open, the evidence queued up on my phone. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. You said it was urgent, Harold. Show me what you've got. My fingers trembled only slightly as I tapped play. Brianna's voice filled the room, smooth and venomous. The pool lights are faulty. He slips after a few drinks. It looks like a tragic accident. Lucas's weak protests, her calculating tone, the cold tally of my estate. It was all there preserved in crystal clarity. When the clip ended, Nora leaned back slowly, her expression carved in stone. This isn't family greed, Harold. This is attempted murder for financial gain. And if I'm hearing correctly, it's premeditated. Her words were a strange comfort. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. What I had overheard wasn't just an old man's imagination. It was the blueprint of my own death. I told her everything, the overheard whisper at my birthday, the cameras I had installed years ago, the late-night plotting by the pool. My voice caught only once when I described the look on Lucas's face. That flicker of hesitation that made me want to believe he wasn't entirely lost. Nora folded her hands. You need 3 things immediately: legal protection, for your estate medical documentation, proving your cognitive health, and law enforcement ready to intervene. Because Harold, if they're willing to stage an accident in your own pool, they'll claim later that you were confused, incompetent, maybe even suicidal. We need to cut off every angle before they move. She picked up the phone and dialed a number with practiced precision. Detective Raymond Holt, Elder Crimes Division, Palm Beach. You'll want to hear this. Within 20 minutes, a tall man in a navy suit walked into her office. Holt was grizzled mid-50s with the kind of presence that said he'd seen too many families betray their elders for money. He listened carefully as I replayed the recording. His jaw tightened at Brianna's words. She's done this before. Holt muttered. Name's Brianna to you, but we've seen her surface in Naples and Fort Lauderdale under different names. Each time an older man drowns or falls. Each time the widow or daughter-in-law walks away richer. But we've never had hard evidence. Until now. My stomach turned. So it wasn't just me. I was one in a line of targets, and my son had walked me straight into her trap. Holt looked me square in the eye. Mr. Mercer, you've got 2 options. We can pull you out now, relocate protective custody, or we let them think you're blind while we set the net. With your cooperation, we could catch her in the act, maybe dismantle her whole operation. I thought of Margaret's Bible, the words on the first page, faith is the blueprint. Faith didn't mean fleeing. Faith meant standing firm and letting truth collapse the false structures around you. I straightened my shoulders. We set the net. Nora nodded. Then here's the plan. First, you'll undergo a full cognitive evaluation. Dr. Patel is the best in the county. Once he certifies you're sharp as a tack, no defense attorney can claim incompetence. Second, I'll lock down your estate. We'll file an amendment moving your assets into a protective trust, untouchable by Lucas or Brianna. Third, Detective Holt will place surveillance around your property. If they move forward with their plan, they'll be caught in the act, no wiggle room. I exhaled slowly, the first breath of real relief I'd taken in days. This was a blueprint. I understood foundation, structure, reinforcement. We were building a fortress out of law and truth. Still a part of me ached. Lucas, my boy, my flesh and blood. How had we come to this? I spoke softly, almost to myself. I want him to live through this. To face justice, yes. But I don't want him dead. Detective Holt's eyes softened just for a moment. Justice isn't about destroying him, Mr. Mercer. It's about making sure he doesn't destroy you or anyone else. Sometimes mercy looks like prison walls. We spent hours going over details, where the tactical team would hide on the night of the attempt, which cameras I should leave visible, and which ones we'd add secretly. How to act normal, clueless, while every step of theirs was being recorded. When I left the office, the sun was setting over the bay. Miami's skyline glittered with lights towers I might have designed in another life. For the first time in days, I felt steady. They thought I was the prey. But an architect knows the strength of any structure lies not in what you see, but in the hidden reinforcements. And I was about to reinforce every inch of my life. The old workshop at the back of my property smelled of sawdust and sea air. It had been my sanctuary long before it became a target. I'd built this outbuilding myself when the villa was still just a shell, thick cedar beams, hurricane-rated windows, workbenches lined with the tools of my trade. Here I had drafted designs for hotels, churches, even the city's new library. This was where ideas became blueprints, and blueprints became reality. Tonight, it felt like a chapel. I set my leather notebook on the scarred oak bench and unrolled the floor plans of my own home. The paper crackled like old parchment. Every wire, every camera angle, every emergency exit, I had drawn them all. This was the one space Brianna had not yet invaded, the one place where my hands and mind were still my own. On the wall above my drafting table hung a photo of Margaret Sunhat on her head, sitting by this same pool with Lucas as a little boy splashing at her feet. I stared at it until my eyes blurred. That photograph was a map of what was at stake, a life built on sweat and sacrifice, a son raised to believe he was safe. I pulled out the small Bible from the wooden box. Its pages were thin as onion skin edges yellowed. I thumbed to the inside cover again. Faith is the blueprint. The words no longer looked like a gentle reminder. They looked like a directive. I spoke aloud to the empty room. Maybe, Lord, this is why you kept me here. Maybe all those years of drawing lines and measuring loads were training for this moment. Give me clarity. Give me courage. Don't let me become bitter, but don't let me become a victim either. The workshop's overhead light buzzed softly. Outside, the palms hissed in the wind. Inside, my heartbeat slowed, matching the rhythm of the waves. The prayer was not fancy. It was an architect's prayer, practical, deliberate, steady. And in the quiet that followed, I felt a kind of resolve settle over me, like a blueprint finally snapping into place. I turned back to the plans. Detective Holt's men would be in place Sunday morning, but that wasn't enough for me. If Brianna's accidents had fooled authorities before I wanted evidence so clear a child could see it. I began to sketch modifications, 2 micro cameras hidden in the coping stones around the pool, angled to catch every movement near the faulty lights, a concealed microphone under the teak bar to capture any final instructions she might give Lucas. A secondary cloud backup routed through an off-site server, so even if the main DVR was destroyed, the recordings would survive. I labeled each edition with the same neat handwriting I'd used for hotel blueprints decades earlier. Old muscles remembered their work. The act of planning steadied me. It was as if Margaret's voice was there reminding me the best structures aren't built in panic, but in patience. When the sketches were complete, I rolled them up and slid them into a steel tube, locking it in my safe, along with the external hard drives. I took photos with my phone and sent them encrypted to Nora. layers upon layers. If Brianna thought she was the only one playing chess, she was about to meet an architect of fortresses. For a moment I sat back on the stool, palms pressed together. I was not naive. Sunday morning would still be dangerous. A cornered predator is unpredictable, and my own son, my own blood would be standing beside her. But faith, preparation, and experience are a powerful trinity. I whispered one last time, I built this house to be unshakable. With your help, I'll build a case just as strong. Then I rose, flicked off the light, and stepped into the cool Florida night. The villa glowed softly across the lawn, serene as a postcard. But inside, two people were already rehearsing my death. They believed they were walking me toward an accident. They didn't know I was walking them into a plan. Sunday evening carried the kind of stillness Florida rarely grants. The palms barely moved, the ocean seemed to hold its breath, and the villa glowed warm against the encroaching dark. I had lived in this house for over 20 years, but that night it felt like a stage, the pool shimmering in the spotlight. The actors rehearsed the script already written. Only they didn't know I had rewritten the ending. Dinner had been carefully ordinary. A pot roast, a bottle of Cabernet, and small talk that felt like walking a tightrope. Lucas barely touched his food. Brianna, on the other hand, smiled her flawless hostess smile, pouring my glass a little too often, encouraging me with that sugary tone. One more, Harold, it's a celebration. I let her. I pretended to wobble when I stood, pretended to slur my words, just enough for her to think the liquor had dulled me. In truth, my head was clear. Every sip of wine had been chased with water, every move calculated. Architects don't build by accident. We plan every load, every line. Tonight was no different. Around 11:30, Brianna placed her manicured hand on my arm. Why don't we enjoy the pool, Harold? The night's too beautiful to waste indoors. Lucas's eyes darted to mine. For a fraction of a second, the boy I once knew flickered there, hesitant, pleading. But Brianna's grip on him was stronger than mine had ever been. He followed her lead like a man chained. We walked out onto the pool deck. The water gleamed silver under the moonlight, calm, inviting, hiding the deadly secret in its wiring. I felt the cameras watching from their hidden places, recording every breath, every step. Careful now, Brianna cooed, as if she were concerned, guiding me closer to the edge. Don't want you to trip. I let my foot catch the corner of a chair, stumbled just enough to sell the part. Lucas swallowed hard. Dad, maybe we shouldn't. Shut up, she hissed through clenched teeth. It has to be now. Her hand pressed firmly against my back. One sharp push that was her plan. One splash, one surge of electricity, and then a staged panic call. I could almost hear her rehearsing the lines. It was horrible, officer, he just slipped. But instead of falling, I turned. At the exact moment her hand thrust forward, I pivoted and let my weight drop sideways, sprawling onto the tiles rather than into the water. Her momentum carried her forward, nearly sending her in instead. That was the signal. Floodlights exploded from the hedges. Red and blue strobes painted the night. The sound of boots on stone shattered the silence as Detective Holt's tactical team surged onto the deck. Weapons-drawn voices booming Palm Beach police step away from him. Brianna froze, her mask cracking for the first time. What is this? She shrieked, her perfect voice breaking. Lucas stumbled back, his face pale as the moon. I rose slowly, brushing dust from my shirt. My knees ached from the fall, but my voice was steady. "This," I said, staring straight at her, "is the end of your little blueprint." Officers pulled her arms behind her, snapping on handcuffs. She fought like a wild animal, her diamond bracelet clattering onto the tiles. Lucas didn't resist, he simply collapsed into the nearest chair, his head in his hands. Detective Holt stepped forward, his expression grim. "Brianna Whitaker, also known as Brianna Chase, Brianna Lowe, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder insurance fraud and suspected involvement in multiple staged drownings across Florida." Her eyes locked on mine, cold and venomous. "You old fool," she spat. "Do you really think prison will stop people like me? There are always more." "Maybe," I said quietly, "but there won't be more victims with your name on them." The tactical team escorted her away, her protests fading into the night. Lucas remained seated, shaking, whispering something I couldn't quite hear. Perhaps it was regret. Perhaps it was too late. I looked out at the pool, still glittering under the moon. Hours earlier, it had been intended as my grave. Now it was the brightest piece of evidence I'd ever seen, every camera, every microphone capturing the moment predators became prisoners. For the first time in days, I allowed myself a long, steady breath. The push had failed. The blueprint of murder had collapsed. And for once, the structure I had built of preparation, of patience, of faith stood stronger than ever. The trial began 3 months later in the gleaming marble courthouse of West Palm Beach. By then, the story had spread across the state. Wealthy architect survives family plot to stage his death. Reporters crowded the steps every morning, their cameras flashing, as I walked inside with Detective Holt and Nora at my side. Inside the courtroom, Brianna no longer looked like the glamorous hostess who had charmed my son and fooled my neighbors. The designer gowns were gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit. Her hair was tied back, her wrists shackled. But her eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were unchanged. She watched me the way an architect studies blueprints, looking for weaknesses. Lucas sat beside her at the defense table, shoulders slumped, face pale. My son, my blood, my disappointment. He couldn't even meet my eyes. The prosecution laid out everything: the surveillance footage from my cameras, the audio of Brianna detailing the plan, the forensic report on the faulty pool lights she'd insisted I not repair. Detective Holt testified about her aliases, Brianna Chase, Brianna Lowe, and the 2 accidental drownings in Naples and Fort Lauderdale that now looked like rehearsals for my death. When the jury watched the video of her hand pushing at my back of me, turning aside just as the floodlights blazed, the room went silent. There was no room for doubt. Lucas's lawyer tried to paint him as a man manipulated by his wife, a son pressured into silence by debts and fear. And part of me wanted to believe it. But when the recording played of him nodding as she spoke of 7 million reasons, my stomach turned. Fear might excuse silence, but greed does not excuse complicity. The verdict came swiftly. Brianna Whitaker. The judge's voice rang out for conspiracy to commit murder insurance fraud and attempted homicide. This court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She showed no remorse. Not a tear, not a tremor. Only a smirk, as if prison was just another contract to negotiate. Then came Lucas. Lucas Mercer for conspiracy to commit murder and aiding in financial fraud. This court sentences you to 15 years in state prison. He finally looked at me, then tears streaming down his face. His lips formed the words, "I'm sorry," though no sound came out. My chest tightened. This was the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the boy who once begged me to build him a treehouse. Now he was a man being led away in handcuffs, shoulders shaking. There are no blueprints for moments like that. No calculations that can prepare you for watching your own son shackled like a criminal. After the sentencing, reporters swarmed outside the courthouse. "Mr. Mercer, how do you feel?" they shouted. "Do you think justice was served?" I paused on the steps, the Florida sun glaring off marble and camera lenses alike. "Justice was served," I said slowly. "But justice is never without cost. My son made his choices, his wife made hers, the law answered, but no father walks away from this unscarred." That night, back at the villa, I sat by the pool again. The water shimmered as it always had, but it no longer looked like a threat. It looked like truth. The cameras hidden in the stone had turned it from a weapon into a witness. Detective Holt visited a week later. "With Brianna behind bars, we've reopened the Naples and Fort Lauderdale cases. Families finally have answers. You did more than save yourself, Harold. You stopped a predator who's been hunting seniors for years." I nodded, though the victory felt bittersweet. "She nearly destroyed my family to do it." He put a hand on my shoulder. "Sometimes, Mr. Mercer, it takes the collapse of a house to remind us which beams were strong and which ones were rotten." The betrayal of Lucas cut deeper than any physical wound, but I was still standing. The house was still mine, and the truth captured in high definition, sealed in court records, would outlast every lie. As I walked back into my workshop, Margaret's Bible sat open on the bench where I'd left it. I traced the words again, "Faith is the blueprint." And I realized faith had carried me through not just survival, but justice. 6 months after the verdict, I stood in the echoing halls of my Palm Beach villa one final time. The marble floors gleamed as they always had. The chandeliers sparkled in the Florida sun, but the house no longer felt like mine. It was a palace built for family, yet my family had turned it into a battlefield. The realtor's voice carried through the empty rooms. "Mr. Mercer, with the market as it is, this place will go for at least 4.2 million. Possibly higher." I nodded. Money had once been the measure of my success, square footage, valuations, architectural awards. But not anymore. I was selling this house not for profit, but for peace. Let someone else swim in that pool. Let someone else throw their parties on the terrace. For me, those stones would always whisper betrayal. I moved into a smaller home in Sarasota, a modest 2-bedroom cottage shaded by oaks just blocks from the bay. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and it was safe. The first night I slept there with no shadows of wealth or whispers of greed, I felt lighter than I had in years. But survival wasn't enough. If Margaret had been alive, she would have said, "Don't waste pain, turn it into purpose." And so I did. I used the proceeds of the sale to establish the Margaret Foundation, named for the woman whose faith had carried me through the darkest nights. The mission was simple: protect seniors from fraud, manipulation, and exploitation. Every dollar I had once intended for Lucas now went toward building a shield for those who, like me, had thought love was enough to protect them. I traveled across Florida speaking at community centers, libraries, and retirement homes. I carried the Bible Margaret gave me, holding it up as both a relic and a reminder that faith, preparation, and wisdom were stronger than any scheme. I told my story honestly, I told them about the pool, the cameras, the whispered words on my birthday. I showed them how easy it is for predators, even family, to turn inheritance into incentive for murder. I watched faces in the audience tighten, nod, sometimes even break into tears. Betrayal wasn't rare. Too many knew it firsthand. One afternoon, after a workshop in Naples, a widow pressed my hands in hers. "Mr. Mercer, last week, my daughter tried to get me to sign papers I didn't understand. Because of your story, I stopped her. I took them to a lawyer instead. You saved me." Those words were worth more than all the millions in my old estate. At the Sarasota cottage, I converted my garage into a training space. Workbenches lined with pamphlets, laptops connected to demo surveillance systems, volunteers teaching seniors how to recognize scams. The same drafting table where I had once designed luxury resorts now held blueprints of protection checklists, emergency contacts, legal templates. Every nail I hammered, every file I printed felt like redemption. Neighbors began to gather weekly. Coffee brewed, folding chairs, set out stories shared. We built something together, a community that refused to let age equal weakness. And each time I locked up after a meeting, I looked up at the photo of Margaret above the door. She smiled in her straw hat, sunlight on her face. I whispered, "We're building again, Maggie. Not hotels, not villas, something stronger. A foundation they can't burn down." The betrayal had broken my old life. But from its ruins, I was laying bricks of something new. Something no greedy hand could steal. The night after our first community workshop in Sarasota, I sat alone on the porch of my cottage, listening to the cicadas hum and the bay water lap against the shore. The air was warm, the stars scattered bright above the oaks, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly at peace. 6 months earlier, I was meant to be a drowned man at the bottom of my own swimming pool. Instead, I was alive, sitting under the same sky Margaret used to love, carrying on her legacy in a way neither of us could have imagined. The betrayal of my son still lived inside me. It wasn't something a judge's gavel could erase. But I had learned a truth that only suffering teaches. Sometimes family isn't bound by blood. Sometimes it's bound by faith, by shared struggle, by people who choose to stand beside you when others walk away. I opened the old Bible again, the one Margaret had pressed into my hands on our wedding day. Its pages had grown thin and delicate, but the words inside had become stronger than steel. I traced the inscription, "Faith is the blueprint." She had been right. Faith was what gave me the clarity to see danger for what it was. Faith steadied my hands when I sketched the counterplan that saved my life. Faith turned my grief into a foundation others could build on. It wasn't just about surviving Brianna's scheme or Lucas's weakness. It was about showing every senior who heard my story that age is not helplessness. That we carry in our years a wisdom younger predators can never match. That when faith, preparation, and community come together, no scheme can stand. Letters began to arrive, handwritten, emailed, sometimes even delivered by neighbors. From Tampa, a man who stopped his grandson from draining his savings. From Jacksonville, a widow who refused to sign over her deed. From Miami, a retired teacher who said, "Your story gave me the courage to say no." Each message reminded me that the trap meant for me had instead caught something bigger. It caught the attention of those who needed hope. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the night, and whispered, "Thank you, Lord. You saved me not just to keep me alive, but to give me work worth living for. So here I am, Harold Mercer, architect, by trade survivor, by grace and teacher, by calling. They tried to use my own pool as my grave, but God turned it into my testimony. And now I ask you, when betrayal comes from those closest to us, what do you believe saves us in the end? Is it faith? Is it wisdom? Is it community? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Brian's Story. Because if my life has taught me anything, it's this: blueprints aren't just for buildings, they're for lives. And with faith as the foundation, no storm, no betrayal can ever wash them away.